Welcome to the Riddles and Secrets of History channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Imagine a world where dense jungles hide ancient temples, where stone pyramids rise above a green ocean of leaves, and intricate hieroglyphs on weathered stele preserve memories of long-lost times. This is the world of the Maya, one of the most mysterious, astonishing, and remarkable civilizations ever to exist on Earth. In the lands that today stretch from Mexico and Guatemala to Honduras and El Salvador, their story began more than 3,000 years ago, when the first tribes founded settlements deep in the impenetrable rainforest. These villages grew, transforming into vast centers of knowledge and art. Unlike empires ruled by a single monarch, the Maya had no unified state. Their world was a tapestry of independent city-states, each striving for greatness and power. The Maya world was revealed to us through the patient work of archaeologists, through Spanish chronicles describing the last days of free Maya cities, and, most importantly, through the Maya themselves, who left behind manuscripts filled with the magic of myths and prophecies. Their sacred books, such as the Popol Vuh and the books of Chilam Balam, speak of gods, heroes, and the birth of the universe, hiding within their pages not only religious visions but also the ancient history of the people. Yet even today, the Maya remain an enigma. Why did they abandon their great cities? How, without metal tools, did they raise monumental temples? How did they create calendars able to predict eclipses with astonishing precision? These questions continue to fascinate scholars and lovers of mysteries alike. Welcome to the world of the Maya, a realm of discoveries, legends, and unanswered riddles. The history of the Maya spans more than 3 millennia. Scholars usually divide it into 3 broad eras: pre-classic, classic, and post-classic. These boundaries are not absolute, but they help us understand how modest farming villages grew into mighty cities, how science, art, and religion flourished, and how crises led to decline. Our journey begins at the dawn of their culture, when the Maya were just taking their first steps. Around 2000 BC, their earliest settlements appeared, small villages scattered through the dense jungle. Unlike nomadic tribes, the Maya already lived a settled life, cultivating maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers. They built complex irrigation systems that allowed them to keep harvests steady even during droughts. Maize, or corn, as we know it, played a central role not only as food but also as a sacred symbol. According to their myths, the first humans were formed from maize dough and given life by the gods. The Maya did not arise in isolation. At the same time, along the Gulf of Mexico, the Olmec civilization flourished. Its influence on early Maya culture was profound. The Olmecs created the first writing system in Mesoamerica, developed a calendar, and formed elaborate religious cults. Archaeological evidence shows that the Maya adopted and refined many of these achievements, such as the vigesimal, base 20, counting system and the concept of zero. From the Olmecs they also inherited the idea of cyclical time and the cult of the feathered serpent, a deity that would later become Kukulkan. But the Maya went further, perfecting these concepts, crafting the most accurate calendar of the ancient world and one of its most intricate scripts. By about 1000 BC, they began building their first cities. One of the oldest archaeological sites from this period is Nakbi, in modern-day Guatemala, where researchers have uncovered stone platforms and early pyramids, signs of emerging architecture and social organization. A class of priests also appeared, responsible not only for rituals but for astronomy, mathematics, and governing the communities. Already they were carving the first hieroglyphs, foreshadowing the flowering of Maya writing in the classic era. As settlements expanded, the need for centralized authority grew. Village chiefs became rulers, their power passing through dynasties that would govern Maya city-states for centuries. Their authority rested not just on military strength but also on religious legitimacy. They were seen as intermediaries between humans and gods. Alliances formed among cities, along with rivalries and conflicts. Archaeological finds reveal traces of battles, fortifications, and symbols of warfare. Despite this, the early Maya era was a time of formation, of gathering knowledge, adapting borrowed traditions, and forging a unique path. We now enter the classic period, the Maya Golden Age. Ancient villages evolved into magnificent city-states, temples soared toward the sky, science and art reached dazzling heights. It was an era of rulers whose names were carved in stone, of triumphs in architecture, astronomy, and literature, but also an age of wars, intrigue, and power struggles. Each great Maya city was unique, with its own identity, architecture, ambitions, and even style of warfare. Tikal, the city of the jaguar, lay in the Guatemalan jungle. It became a hub of political influence and one of the foremost military strongholds of its time. Towering above the rainforest, its pyramids asserted dominance over the whole civilization. The Temple of the Great Jaguar, Tikal's most famous monument, served as the tomb of Chachankawilai, a ruler who consolidated power through conquest. The jaguar, a symbol of might, night, and the underworld, embodied royal authority and warrior spirit. Carvings show the king seated on a jaguar pelt throne, while his burial chamber overflowed with treasures affirming his power. If Tikal was a jaguar, Calakmul was a serpent. Located in what is now Mexico, Calakmul stood for cunning, wisdom, and mastery over life and death. Unlike Tikal, which built its supremacy on war, Calakmul excelled in diplomacy and intrigue. Over 2 centuries it forged alliances, wove conspiracies, and gradually weakened its rival. Yet in the 6th century, Tikal struck back, defeating Calakmul and regaining supremacy. Their rivalry became one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts in Maya history, toppling dynasties, destroying dozens of towns, and sapping the strength of the whole civilization. While Tikal and Calakmul battled for dominance, Copan and Palenque emerged as centers of scholarship, art, and engineering. Copan developed an extraordinary writing tradition, its rulers immortalizing their reigns in stone stele. Palenque, meanwhile, blossomed into an architectural jewel. Here stands the Temple of the Inscriptions, burial place of the great Pakal, whose jade mask and sarcophagus rank among the most celebrated archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. For the Maya, war was more than a struggle for land or power, it was a sacred ritual, a test of valor and a means to reinforce the ruler's legitimacy. Warriors were mediators between the living and Xibalba, the underworld. From childhood, boys were taught that a man's strength lay in his ability to fight, capture enemies, and offer them in sacrifice to the gods. Victory brought glory, respect, social status, and a place among the elite. Maya fighters were not drafted at random, they were carefully chosen and trained. Only those ready to devote their lives to capturing foes, defending their lord, and dying for the gods could join their ranks. Professional soldiers, known as Holkanab, fought in the front lines, wearing the finest armor and commanding small squads. The highest commander, the Nakom, devised battle plans, selected targets for conquest, and bore responsibility for success or failure. Often the ruler himself led troops into battle, personifying the god of war whose presence inspired victory. Among these fighters stood the elite warriors, the jaguars. They struck suddenly, breaking enemy lines, seizing leaders, then melting back into the night. Their tactics mirrored a hunt in the wild: stealth, patience, sudden assault. Faces streaked with black paint, eyes gleaming in moonlight, they didn't simply fight, they hunted. Before pouncing, they imitated the terrifying roar of a jaguar, freezing opponents with fear. Their blows were swift and precise, disarming foes, shattering bones, but sparing life so that blood could be offered atop the pyramids. Night was their ally, they moved like shadows through the jungle, encircling prey before striking. They knew when to wait and when to strike. If the jaguar warriors mastered the very strategy of war, they did not attack first. They infiltrated enemy cities, sowing chaos. They appeared among the inhabitants, whispering words of betrayal, bribing guards, and opening the gates when their armies were already approaching. They did not fight if they could win the battle without a fight. Golden amulets in the shape of snakes adorned their skin, and their bodies were covered with tattoos resembling coiled vipers. The patron of these warriors was Kukulkan himself, the feathered serpent, the god of wisdom and destructive power. The snake's favorite weapons were spears with poisoned tips. They poisoned water, crept up unnoticed for precise strikes to the throat or liver. When the darkness of night faded, the eagle warriors went into battle. They were the thunder, the storm, the fury of the sun itself. They did not hide, did not wait, did not think. They swept away the enemy with power and speed. Their armor was decorated with eagle feathers, and their faces were painted with gold and red patterns. Raising their hands, they imitated the flapping of wings, and their battle cries were heard for many miles. The eagles always attacked first, breaking the enemy ranks and using various weapons such as throwing darts, spears, and large swords. They struck from top to bottom, breaking everything that stood. Only when the enemy's spirit was broken did the jaguar and snake warriors arrive. Then, no one could be saved. The Maya did not engage in mass battles on open plains. Their battlefield was the jungle, mountains, and walled cities. They did not attack head-on, they disappeared and reappeared where they were least expected. An army needs water to live, but without it, it will fall in a few days. They blockaded springs and poisoned supplies. They also used fear, emitting animalistic cries before battle, displaying the skulls of sacrificed enemies, and setting up false ambushes. The battle always went according to their planned scenario. They broke the enemy before he could understand what was happening. But what happened to those who survived and were captured? They became sacrifices, offerings to the gods. The captives were led through the city streets, shown to the people, and at the end of their path, priests awaited them on top of the pyramids. Their hearts were cut from their chests, their blood feeding the gods. But captives were not always sacrificed immediately. For a time, they could be used as slaves. If a captive was important, such as a ruler or a great warrior, he might be left alive. His head would be shaved, he would be forced to wear the clothes of a captive, and serve a new master. In the 9th century, the Maya city-states began to fade. It was not a sudden collapse or a catastrophe that happened overnight, but a long, painful process. People left the once mighty centers one by one, leaving the streets deserted and the temples empty. But this end was only the beginning of a new era. The south, once flourishing and powerful, plunged into darkness. But in the north of the Yucatan, under the scorching sun, a new world was being born. Cities that had rivaled each other for centuries suddenly found themselves in the same trouble. First, the trade caravans disappeared, then the markets fell silent. The homes of the nobility, which once shone with gold and jade, were covered in dust. People left. They abandoned everything: fields, homes, ancestral altars. Even the priests, whose prayers to the gods had once been answered, now fled in fear. What happened? Why did a civilization that built incredible cities and understood the secrets of the stars suddenly lose its power? Some believe a great drought came. The rains that had nourished these lands for centuries suddenly stopped, and the reservoirs dried up, unable to support the people. Others say the cities destroyed themselves, caught in a whirlwind of bloody wars. Great rulers, striving to hold on to power, fought each other, destroying everything they themselves had built. But whatever the reason, one thing is clear: the southern lands, once radiant with greatness, became deserted. But this did not mean the history of the Maya was over. They did not disappear, they simply relocated. The Yucatan, a vast peninsula covered with rocky plains and dry forests, became the new home for those fleeing the fallen cities. There were no dense jungles or deep rivers here, but there were cenotes, natural wells filled with fresh water that became the source of life. And here, new cities arose, new powerful centers like Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan. When a traveler approached Chichen Itza, he saw an unusual world. The city was not like the southern Maya centers. There was something foreign, something new about it. Great temples rose to the sky, as they did in Tikal, but the architecture was different. The stone halls were wider, more massive, and among the decorations appeared symbols that had not been seen before in Maya culture. In the main square stood the Pyramid of Kukulkan, a step temple that turned into a mysterious spectacle every spring and autumn. When the sun set at a certain angle, the shadow of a huge serpent appeared on the pyramid steps, as if the god himself were descending to earth. The locals said that from beyond the northern horizon, warriors once came whom no one had ever seen before. Their skin was dark, but their rituals differed from the local ones. They wore armor decorated with snakes and feathers, their weapons were different, and they spoke of a god in another language. These were the Toltecs, a people who came from the lands where the legendary Aztec Empire would later rise. They brought with them a new philosophy, religion, and new methods of warfare. And finally, they brought their god, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Kukulkan was a god of civilization, order, and knowledge. But at the same time, he was a deity of war and power. He demanded not only submission but also blood. Where the Maya had once played a sacred ball game, now the heads of captives rolled across the stones as priests sacrificed them. People were thrown into the cenotes, believing their souls would travel to the underworld of the gods. On ritual altars, hearts were extracted from the bodies of warriors and raised to the sky as offerings. The Yucatan was not a unified state, it was a collection of cities, each fighting for dominance. Chichen Itza fell, but Uxmal rose. Uxmal vanished, but Mayapan ascended. But none of these cities could hold power over the entire land for long. The Maya, who had built their worlds for centuries, were now tearing them apart with their own hands. Their internal strife weakened them, and on the horizon, a new threat was slowly approaching. From across the ocean, from lands no one had yet heard of, sailed ships carrying men in shining armor, bearing fiery weapons and deadly diseases. The Spanish. And their arrival was destined to change the world of the Maya forever. The humid air of the Yucatan hung over the green jungles and ancient temples. The first alarming sound was carried on the wind, heavy sails billowed, and ships unlike anything the Maya seafarers had ever seen dropped anchor off the coast. The day the Spanish first set foot on Maya land, the final chapter of their history began. In 1511, a Spanish ship was caught in a storm. The wind, whistling like the voice of an ancient god, tore at the sails. Waves battered the wooden hull until the vessel finally broke apart on the reefs. 30 men, clinging to planks, tried to reach the shore. They did not know where they were. As soon as they reached land, they were surrounded by armed warriors. Obsidian swords, macuahuitl, drawn bows, and spears with bone tips were all aimed at the strangers. The Maya were not expecting guests and certainly did not trust them. The surviving Spaniards were taken captive. Some were killed immediately, others were soon sacrificed to the gods. Their hearts were torn out on the tops of pyramids, blood flowed down the stones, and their skulls decorated ritual altars. But 2 survived. One of the survivors was named Gonzalo Guerrero. He was not only a sailor but also a soldier who knew what it meant to fight and what it meant to survive. He quickly understood that if he wanted to stay alive, he had to become one of these people. He learned their language and their customs, gradually earning their respect and becoming one of the Maya. Gonzalo Guerrero became a warrior, married the daughter of a local chief, and had children. When the Spanish reappeared on the shores of the Yucatan years later, he remained on the side of the Maya. He went out against them with an obsidian sword in his hand, with Maya tattoos on his face, and his body painted with warrior patterns. He died as a Maya, defending his new homeland. The other survivor, Geronimo de Aguilar, chose a different path. He remained a slave but preserved his faith and culture. And when Hernán Cortés arrived years later, Aguilar joined him, becoming an interpreter and intermediary between the Spanish and the peoples of the Yucatan. This split, this choice between the Maya and Spain, was a harbinger of what was to happen to the entire civilization. In 1517, the Spanish captain Francisco Hernández de Córdoba led a fleet to the shores of the Yucatan. This time, their arrival was not an accident but a purposeful expedition. They were looking for gold, new lands, and peoples to conquer. The Maya rulers, priests, warriors, and common people met the strangers. They brought gifts to the foreigners: cotton fabrics, cacao, and jade jewelry. They did not understand what lay ahead. The Spanish examined the treasures, felt the fabrics, tasted the cacao, but there was no delight in their eyes. They were looking for gold, and the Maya had little of it. Soon, the meeting turned into a massacre. The Spanish attacked first. Their steel swords cut through the shields and armor of the Maya. Their muskets fired, mowing down warriors and breaking their ranks. But the Maya did not flee. They fought back, setting ambushes in the jungle, sneaking up at night, and setting fire to the Spanish camps. They knew no fear, for if they died in battle, they would go to the gods. But the forces were unequal. The Spanish left the Yucatan, but they promised to return. And they would return, with a larger army, with more fire and cruelty. But the Spanish had a weapon that not even the Maya rulers knew. The Spanish brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and typhus, which the people of the New World had never encountered. These diseases did not kill the Spanish as quickly because Europeans had built up immunity to them over centuries. But among the Maya, there was no defense. People died by the hundreds, then thousands, then by entire cities. They prayed to the gods but received no answer. They tried to make more sacrifices, to tear out more hearts, but the gods remained silent. The cities turned into graveyards. The Spanish might not have had to fight at all, the diseases were already doing their work for them. When the Spanish had already trampled the lands of the Aztecs and Incas with their boots, and new colonies blossomed on the bones of ancient civilizations, the Maya still held on. Their history did not end overnight, nor did it collapse with a single city. They fought to the last. Their last cities remained free, like islands of light in the darkness of conquest. The Spanish called them stubborn and cruel barbarians, but in reality, the Maya simply refused to surrender. They had no single king like the Aztecs, whose capital's fall would mean the end of everything. Their civilization was woven from many city-states, and each fought for its freedom, for its land, and for its gods. The conquest of the Yucatan lasted for more than a century and a half. One by one, the Spanish destroyed cities, demolished temples, and killed priests. But always, somewhere in the jungle, a new war chief would rise. Somewhere, priests would again whisper prayers to Kukulkan. Somewhere, altars for sacrifices would be erected to bring back the gods. But in the end, all the cities fell. The longest to resist the Spanish onslaught was Tayasal, a city that stood on an island in the middle of Lake Petanitsa. Its powerful walls were reflected in the water, as if the city itself floated between two worlds, the world of the ancient gods and the world of the conquerors. Tayasal remained free when all other Maya lands had fallen. Here, sacrifices were still made to the old gods, and people still remembered the voices of the spirits living in the jungle. The Spanish could not simply storm it, the island, surrounded by water, was a natural fortress. The chief of Tayasal, Kanak, understood that the Spanish were strong, cunning, and cruel. But he also knew that if the city fell, his people faced either slavery or death. At first, he tried to negotiate, hoping he could make peace with the Spanish, preserve his power and his gods. He hoped they could reach an agreement, find a compromise, and avoid destruction. But he was wrong. In 1697, a Spanish force under Martín de Ursúa approached the lake. They arrived with cannons, soldiers, and fire capable of burning entire cities. They began to build boats to cross the lake's waters, and when their fleet was ready, they descended upon the last free Maya city. Tayasal fell in fire and blood. The Spanish destroyed the temples, broke the idols, and killed those who refused to submit. With the fall of Tayasal, the era of the independent Maya civilization ended. But the Spanish not only destroyed their cities but also the very memory of the Maya. The Maya were, among other things, keepers of knowledge. Their scholars knew numbers, understood the movement of stars and planets, created precise calendars, and understood the concept of zero long before the Europeans. They wrote books in which they preserved the history of their peoples, their myths, and their science. But when the Spanish came, these books became something terrible to them. The Spanish bishop Diego de Landa declared that the Maya books were works of the devil, that they contained false knowledge displeasing to the Christian God. He ordered all the codices, writings, and records that could be found to be gathered and burned. In the central square of a Spanish settlement, a huge bonfire was lit. Into the fire were thrown scrolls, books, and wooden tablets with engraved symbols. The flames consumed centuries of knowledge. The Maya stood and watched as their history died. They saw their world disappear in the fire, as black clouds of smoke carried away the words of their ancestors, their prayers, their science, and their life. Later, Diego de Landa wrote in his report, "We found a large number of books, but as they contained nothing but superstitions and falsehoods of the devil, we burned them all, which they regretted to an amazing degree, and which caused them much affliction." They were not just afflicted, they were killed inside. Of the thousands of books that existed in the Maya civilization, only 4 have survived to this day. But even among the ashes, memory did not completely disappear. The descendants of the priests could no longer write their books in their native script, so they began to write them in their own language but using the Latin alphabet. Thus appeared the Popol Vuh, a book of myths and legends, stories of the creation of the world, ancient gods, and heroes, and the books of Chilambalam, predictions, prophecies, and fragments of history recorded secretly, in fear of the Spanish. They could not replace the burned books, but they preserved the voice of an ancient people. When the Spanish burned the cities, crushed the temples, and declared that their God had triumphed, the Maya did not stop believing. They knew that the true gods do not die or disappear. They were still in the light of the sun, in the sound of the rain, and in the breath of the wind. The Maya understood that their lives were connected to these deities. Every day, every harvest, every victory and defeat was the result of their will. If the rains were late, it meant Chak was angry. If the year was bountiful, it meant Kukulkan was pleased. If someone died, the road to Xibalba, the underworld of the death gods, awaited them. In their faith, there was no good and evil in the conventional sense. The gods could be merciful, but they could also punish. They demanded submission, adherence to traditions, and sacrifices. Without these, the world could disappear, just as the great cities, abandoned by people and swallowed by the jungle, had disappeared. Among all the gods, Kukulkan was one of the greatest and most revered. His image combined the power of the serpent and the lightness of the bird, uniting 2 worlds, the earthly and the heavenly. Legends say that Kukulkan came from the east and taught people writing, science, and crafts. He gave them laws, taught them to build cities, and created the rituals that were meant to maintain order in the world. He was depicted as a huge serpent covered in feathers. Sometimes he appeared in human form but with the head of a serpent or adorned with feathers. In art, he always looked powerful and serene, exuding order and wisdom. It was thanks to him that the Maya considered themselves a chosen people, capable of understanding the laws of time and space. But one day, he left. Legends say he departed from the Maya lands. When the Maya saw Hernán Cortés, some wondered if it was the return of Kukulkan. Had he not come to take back what he had once left behind? But Cortés did not bring them the light of knowledge, he brought only destruction. Without rain, there would be no life in these lands. Fields and rivers would dry up. That is why Chak was one of the most important Maya gods. He was imagined as a powerful spirit of water, capable of summoning thunderstorms, filling the wells, and granting a harvest, or, conversely, sending a drought. Chak could be kind when people honored him and cruel when they forgot him. To win his favor, the Maya held ceremonies, throwing offerings, and sometimes people, into the cenotes. Priests said that Chak lived in the heavens, from where he controlled the flows of water. He was sometimes depicted with a serpent coiled in his hand, from whose mouth lightning bolts erupted. If there was no rain for a long time, people knew he was angry. They would sacrifice children, young maidens, or warriors, throwing them into the deep, cold water of the cenotes. They believed their souls could implore Chak to send rain. When thunder rumbled in the distance, when the first drop fell on the parched earth, the people knew he had heard them. Before the sun and moon appeared, before the first humans drew breath and the world took shape, there was Itzamna. He was the first being, the force that gave birth to everything. He was not a god in the conventional sense, but rather the eternal beginning, present before the emergence of time. The Maya believed that he wove this world, intertwining heaven and earth, creating harmony between the elements. But he was not cruel or demanding like many other gods. He did not thirst for blood and did not demand constant sacrifices. Instead, he bestowed knowledge, protected the wise, and patronized priests and rulers. It is said that Itzamna created the world by separating the sky and the earth, much like a craftsman cuts fabric. He raised the celestial vault, establishing the 13 levels of the heavens where gods and spirits lived. Then, he created the earth, giving it 9 levels leading to the underworld, Xibalba. Between them, he left a space intended for humans, animals, and plants. But the earth was initially bare, empty, and motionless. So, Itzamna created the sun to bring this world to life and the moon to illuminate the nights. After that, he created the first humans. Unlike the gods, they were weak and mortal. He gave them fire so they could keep warm, corn so they could live, and the ability to speak. Then, he stepped back into the shadows. His mission was complete, the world existed, and time had begun. Priests believed he had not disappeared entirely but was watching over humanity from the heavens. He does not interfere in their affairs as other gods do, but if the balance is disturbed, he will appear again to restore it. Unlike Chak, who demands blood for rain, or Kukulkan, who punishes those who forget his laws, Itzamna did not need sacrifices. He was the god of wisdom. They were full of strength, but he waited for them in the shadows, knowing that sooner or later, everyone would stand before him. Apuk looked as the lord of the realm of the dead should. His face was a grinning skull, his eye sockets empty, and his cold hands stole the warmth of life. His neck was adorned with a necklace of eye sockets, and his cloak was woven from shadows. He did not come to people unexpectedly. Owls, mice, and vultures carried news of his approach. If the guttural cry of an owl was heard at night, it meant death was already coming for someone. But people did not just wait for his arrival. They tried to appease him, to slow his steps. Apuk was not a god one could pray to for mercy, but he could be sated so that he would not take too many lives. To maintain the balance, priests sacrificed warriors, captives, and sometimes even members of the nobility. They believed that if they did not give him a few lives, he would take more than necessary himself. But he was not always fed with the blood of others. At times, people would inflict cuts on their own bodies to divert his wrath. They knew they could not stop him, but they tried to make him come for them as late as possible. It's sand that gives life, creates, and fills the world with breath. Apuk takes it away but first checks if the soul is worthy to be reborn among humans. The Maya knew that everything in this world exists thanks to the alternation of creation and destruction. They worshipped the Creator but respected death. They celebrated life but did not fear its end. They did not see death as disappearance but understood it as just a new path that everyone must travel. The underworld of Xibalba. When a person died, their body remained on earth, but their soul began its journey down into the depths hidden from the sunlight. The Maya knew that death was not the end but the beginning of a new trial. Xibalba awaited everyone. It was the underworld, cold and gloomy, full of traps and suffering. Once there, the soul found no peace. It had to pass through numerous trials to prove it was worthy of either eternal rebirth or a place in the celestial worlds. But not all souls reached the end of this path. Many were lost, fell into traps, and remained in the realm of the dead forever. The Maya did not believe in hell in the sense that other cultures imagined it. Xibalba was a world where weakness was punished and the strength of the soul was tested. It was a place of rivers filled with blood and labyrinths where souls wandered for eternity. The entrance to it was located deep within the earth, behind hidden caves, in bottomless cenotes where people threw sacrifices to the gods. In Xibalba, the god of death, Apuk, and his retinue ruled. They did not just wait for the dead, they tested them, tormented them, and forced them to prove their strength. As soon as a soul left the body, it did not immediately enter Xibalba. It faced a judgment where its fate was decided. The Maya believed that the gods looked at a person's life, at their deeds, at the sacrifices they made. Was he brave in battle? Did he honor his ancestors? Did he follow the laws? But this judgment was not just an evaluation of his actions. The soul had to pass through the 9 levels of the underworld, where each trial could either break it or elevate it. The journey through the underworld was incredibly difficult. The gods of Xibalba did not let anyone go easily. The Maya told stories that a traveler descending into the world of the dead faced many deadly trials. One of the first obstacles was a river of blood, which had to be crossed without drowning, otherwise, the soul would remain there forever. Beyond it awaited the halls of trials. In the hall of ice, a deadly cold gripped the traveler, from which one could only be saved by the strength of the spirit. In the hall of fire, flames raged, burning anyone who tried to pass through. In the hall of jaguars, the soul met bloodthirsty predators that lunged at it from the darkness. In the hall of bats, thousands of creatures capable of tearing it to pieces swirled around the victim. Each trial tested willpower, resilience, and the ability not to succumb to fear. Those who passed all the trials proved their strength. They could leave Xibalba and either be reborn in a new body or travel to the celestial worlds where eternal peace awaited them. But the souls of the weak remained in the gloomy depths of the underworld, where they wandered for eternity, finding no exit. However, the Maya believed that even the weakest spirits did not disappear forever. They became shadows that glide through the jungle at night, voices that whisper in the wind. Could one avoid Xibalba? Yes, but not everyone was so fortunate. The most honorable deaths for a Maya were to die in battle, to die in childbirth, or to be sacrificed to the gods. Such souls did not go to Xibalba. For everyone else, there was no choice. They had only to pass all the trials and prove they were worthy of escaping the realm of the dead. For the Maya, death was a journey. They did not fear it but prepared for it, knowing that after death begins the most difficult ordeal. Xibalba awaited all, but not all could escape it. Rituals of blood and sacrifice. The world of the Maya was held in a fragile balance between the forces of life and death, between the light of the sun and the shadows of the underworld. They believed the universe had already been destroyed several times, and if the gods were not sustained, it could disappear again. To prevent this, people had to give the gods what was most valuable: blood, life, and energy. This was an exchange established in ancient times. The gods gave life to man, and man had to periodically give a part of himself back so that the universe could continue to exist. According to the Maya, these sacrifices were not senseless cruelty. Every ritual and every drop of blood had its purpose and meaning. And sometimes, for the gods to accept a gift, it was not necessary to die in battle or on an altar. Sometimes, it was enough to win a game. The Maya believed that blood was the energy and nourishing force necessary for the gods. They thought that in the beginning of time, the gods themselves shed their blood to create the world, and therefore, humans must reciprocate to keep it existing. But not all blood was equally valuable. The more important the person, the more power their sacrifice contained. The blood of kings, priests, and noble warriors was considered the best. It was pure, filled with power and blessings. Captive warriors were sacrificed to the gods of war. Their death signified the victory of one city over another. Children and young maidens were offered to Chak, the god of rain, as their sacrifice was considered particularly powerful and could bring a long-awaited downpour. But the gods did not always demand death. Sometimes, priests themselves would give a part of their own energy by piercing their tongue, ears, or other limbs and shedding blood, which was then burned as an offering to the gods. Each sacrifice was a complex ritual steeped in symbolism. Let's look at some of them. Heart extraction. One of the most famous sacrifices was the removal of the heart. This ritual was performed at the top of pyramids so the gods could see the offering. The person was laid on a sacrificial stone, a special slab with a curve that pushed the chest upward, making it easier to access the heart. A priest, armed with an obsidian knife, would make a quick incision in the chest, pull out the still-beating heart, and raise it to the sky. Blood flowed down the pyramid steps, and the body was either thrown down or used for ritual cannibalism if the victim was a captured warrior. Decapitation. This was used for offerings to the gods of war and the underworld. The victim's hands were tied, they were placed on a special platform, and then a priest would sever the head with a single blow of an obsidian axe. The head was often displayed on a rack, and the blood flowed into special channels leading to the altar. Drowning in cenotes. Cenotes were considered gateways to the underworld. If a victim was thrown into their depths, they would become a messenger between gods and humans. The victims were often young people adorned with jade and gold. They were thrown into the water, and then people would wait. If the victim drowned immediately, the gods had accepted them. If they remained on the surface, they were pulled out, as it was believed the gods had rejected them. But sometimes the gods didn't need blood, they needed victory. One of the most enigmatic traditions of the Maya was the ball game, Pakatok. It wasn't just a sport, it was a ritual battle. Players could not touch the ball with their hands or feet. They used their shoulders, chest, elbows, and hips. The goal was to get a heavy rubber ball through a stone ring set high on the court wall. This was incredibly difficult. The ball weighed several kilograms, and the ring was located at a height of 3 to 6 meters. Games could last for hours, even days, until one team scored the winning goal. It was a symbolic struggle between the forces of light and darkness, between day and night, sun and moon. Some games were just for entertainment. But if a game had ritual significance, it could end in sacrifice. There is a debate about who exactly was sacrificed. Some historians believe that sacrificing the best player was the greatest honor because he would become a messenger between humans and gods. Others believe the losers were sacrificed because they personified the forces of darkness that had to be destroyed. Whatever the case, the ball game was not just a competition, it was a ritual on which the fate of an entire city could depend. When a great ruler died of natural causes, his funeral was special. He was sent on a journey to the world of the gods. The body was washed, anointed with sacred oils, dressed in the finest clothes, and adorned with jade, which symbolized eternal life. The burial was also highly unusual. The tombs were hidden deep within pyramids, creating underground passages and halls filled with offerings. Next to the ruler, they placed jade masks so he could preserve his face after death, clay vessels with food so he would not feel hunger in the afterlife, and sacrificial servants and concubines, people who were killed to accompany him for eternity. It was believed that the ruler became an intermediary between the world of humans and the gods, watching over his people and helping the living from the heavens. The creation myth of the Popol Vuh. Now, let's learn how the Mayas saw the origin of the world, and for that, we will turn to one of the 4 surviving books, the Popol Vuh. Once, in a distant time when the world had no form and the heavens and earth were a single dark ocean, the gods decided it was time to bring order to the chaos. They parted the waters, created mountains, rivers, and trees, and filled the sky with the sun and moon. But this was not enough. Their world lacked those who could remember their names, glorify them, and thank them for the created order. Thus, the first attempt to create humans was born. First, they molded people from clay. But they turned out weak, fragile, unable to speak or hold weapons. So the gods destroyed them and tried again. Next were people made of wood. They were strong, could walk and work, but they remained empty inside. They knew neither fear nor gratitude. They did not honor the gods, did not bring them sacrifices, and did not pray at the altars. Then the creators grew angry. They sent a great flood to destroy them, their own dogs tore them to pieces, and their houses collapsed on their heads. Only on the 3rd attempt did the world find its true masters. The gods created the first people from maize. Their bones were strong like its stalks, their blood flowed like its sap, and their minds were sharp and clear. These people remembered their creators, praised them, and nourished them with sacrifices. Thus began the history of humanity. But not all was calm even in this world. Shadows continued to fight against the light, and one of the greatest battles took place in the underworld, in Xibalba. Somewhere on Earth lived 2 brothers, Hunhunappu and Vukubhunappu, great ball players. They loved their game, and every day the rhythmic thud of their balls shook the earth. But their fun reached the depths of Xibalba, where the grim lords of death lived. The noise disturbed them, and wanting to punish the insolent mortals, they summoned them. The brothers could not refuse. They descended into the world of shadows but failed the trials. They were deceived, tortured, and then killed, left forever in the realm of the dead. But the story did not end there. The soul of Hunhunappu did not disappear without a trace. After some time, in the shadow of a great tree, his seed sprouted, and from it were born the twins, Hunappu and Zbalank. From childhood, they were extraordinary, agile, intelligent, cunning, and strong. When they grew up, fate led them to the ball game, and the sound of their balls once again disturbed the underworld. The lords of Xibalba were enraged again. They summoned the brothers to their world, hoping to trick them as they had their father. But this time, it was different. The twins knew who they were dealing with. They did not bow to false rulers, did not believe the cunning servants, and did not fall into traps. They were sent to deadly trials, the Hall of Cold, where even souls freeze, the Hall of Fire, where flames make it impossible to breathe, the Hall of Tigers, where bloodthirsty beasts await their prey. But they survived, passing through all the trials without flinching. Then the Lords of Death decided to play their own game with them, the ball game. It was not just entertainment, it was a deadly duel. They fought in the darkness, where the ball was the night itself and the opponents were the forces of darkness. But the gods of the underworld could not let them leave. They lured them into a trap, killed them, and divided their bodies, scattering their bones in a river. But the hero twins tricked death itself. They turned into fish, then into old men who could perform miracles. They returned to Xibalba and began to show their magic, resurrecting animals. The Lords of Death, amazed, wanted to see it for themselves. They ordered the old men to kill them and then bring them back to life. But this was part of a clever plan. When they were killed, no one brought them back to life. Thus, the gods of death were defeated. Having conquered the darkness, the twins did not return to Earth. They ascended into the sky, and the gods turned them into the sun and the moon. Now, every day when the sun rises above the horizon, it reminds people of the great victory. They conquered death itself, and as long as their light shines in the heavens, people remember their story. All this is recorded in the ancient text that the Maya called the Popol Vuh. This text has survived fire, time, and destruction. They tried to destroy it, to burn it along with the temples, to wipe it from the face of the earth. But the words remained, passing from mouth to mouth until they were finally written down again. This is not just a book, it is the voice of the ancestors. It is a story that will not die as long as the sun and moon continue their eternal journey across the heavens. The legend of the crystal skulls. Among the many mysteries associated with the Maya civilization, one has particularly captivated people's minds for over 100 years, the legend of the crystal skulls. According to lore, these skulls hold ancient knowledge capable of changing the destiny of humanity. It is said that if all of them are gathered in one place, they will reveal the secrets of the universe, warn of future catastrophes, or even provide the key to immortality. But where did this story come from? The legend of the crystal skulls is not found in ancient Maya myths. It emerged relatively recently, fueled by stories that before humans, a powerful civilization with godlike knowledge existed on Earth. This civilization vanished but left behind 13 artifacts containing all their secrets. These skulls were supposedly made from a single piece of quartz and possess mystical properties, transmitting visions and healing diseases. To activate their power, they must be brought together at a specific time, said to be when humanity is on the brink of self-destruction. For a long time, this story remained just a myth. Everything changed in the early 20th century when the first of these mysterious artifacts was found in the jungles of Belize. In the early 1920s, British adventurer Frederick Mitchell Hedges traveled to the jungles of Central America to study the ruins of the ancient Maya city known as Lebanton. One day, his daughter Anna was exploring the abandoned temples and stumbled upon a strange object glistening in the sun. It was a life-sized human skull carved from a single piece of clear quartz crystal. Its surface was perfectly polished, and the jaw was a separate piece that could move as if it were a living person. When the skull was held up to the light, it refracted the rays in an unusual way. Inside it, flashes of light appeared, like a burning fire. Anna claimed that sometime after the discovery, she began to have strange visions. She saw scenes from the past, heard voices, and felt the skull transmitting unknown knowledge to her. News of the find spread quickly. The mysterious artifact attracted the attention of researchers, mystics, and scientists. Many believed it was a true legacy of the ancient gods. But soon it turned out that it was not the only one. After the discovery at Lebanton, other skulls began to appear, each with its own story. The British Museum holds another quartz skull, acquired in the 19th century from collectors. It is also carved with incredible precision and was considered a relic belonging to Maya priests. Another skull ended up in Paris at the Musée du Quai Branly. It was smaller than the others, but its craftsmanship was astounding, and some believed it belonged to a much more ancient civilization. As the number of skulls grew, the legend of the 13 artifacts scattered around the world began to form. If gathered together, they would unlock the secrets of the universe. Some said they were a gift from the gods, others that they were left by aliens, and a third group believed the skulls could heal diseases and transmit ancient wisdom. An interesting fact is that in the early 20th century, the Ahnenerbe, an organization created in Nazi Germany to search for ancient knowledge, occult artifacts, and research ancient civilizations, became interested in them. It was believed that the Maya, like other great cultures, might possess secret knowledge about the origin of the world. There is a theory that Ahnenerbe researchers tried to find the crystal skulls, hoping to find encrypted knowledge. There is no official confirmation of this. But were the skulls authentic? In the late 20th century, when technology allowed for the study of artifacts at a microscopic level, scientists decided to examine the crystal skulls. They found that their surfaces showed no traces of ancient tools. If the skulls had really been created by the Maya, they should have had scratches from obsidian or stone cutters. Instead, they discovered traces of mechanical polishing characteristic of metal tools from the 19th century. The British Museum conducted a study and concluded that their skull was created in France or Germany in the 19th century, at a time when collectors were actively buying up antiquities. Later, scientists declared that most of the known crystal skulls are fakes made in Europe. Despite the scientists' conclusions, the legend of the crystal skulls has not disappeared. Some argue that the fakes were created in the image of real ancient skulls that are hidden somewhere. Others believe that some skulls might have genuinely belonged to the Maya, but their originals have either disappeared or are still kept in private collections. Anna Mitchell Hedges insisted until the end of her life that her skull was real and possessed unusual properties. The prophecy of 2012, the end of a cycle, not the world. And since we are talking about the mysteries of the Maya, we must mention the prediction that became a global sensation. For several years leading up to December 21, 2012, people all over the world expected the end of the world. Some prepared for natural disasters, others built shelters. Some believed a divine judgment awaited us, while others expected a collision with the mysterious planet Nibiru. Everyone said the same thing: the Maya predicted the end of time. But when the morning of December 22, 2012, arrived, the sun rose peacefully over the horizon. The world remained in place, and the myth collapsed. But where did this idea come from? Did the Maya really believe that their calendar would one day lead to the destruction of the world, or was it just a modern interpretation, distorted by time and people's imaginations? To understand this, one must understand how this ancient civilization perceived time. For us, it is natural to think of time as a straight line. The past is behind us, the present moves forward, and the future is an unknown that will one day become reality. The Maya saw it differently. In their view, time moved in a circle. Just as day is replaced by night and winter by spring, so epochs replaced one another, repeating again and again. For them, there was no final point. Any cycle's end simply meant the beginning of a new turn in history. One of the most complex and accurate tools the Maya created was their long count calendar. It allowed them not just to track days and years but to define huge time cycles spanning millennia. The basis of this system was the Baek-ton, a time period of about 394 years. The Maya believed that 13 Baek-tons made up one great cycle, equal to 5,125 years. And this great cycle was set to conclude on December 21, 2012. But if you look at the ancient inscriptions, nowhere does it say that the world will end after this day. It was simply the end of one time cycle and the beginning of a new one. It all started with a single inscription discovered in the ruins of the ancient city of Tortuguero in Mexico. This stone monument, created over 1,300 years ago, contained a reference to the completion of the 13th Baek-ten. The text stated that at this moment, the god Balin-Yaktu, a mysterious deity associated with change, chaos, and rebirth, would descend. But further on, the text on the inscription is damaged. The lost symbols left room for speculation, and this is where it began. Some archaeologists suggested it might refer to significant changes in the Maya world, perhaps political shifts or natural disasters they observed in their history. But in the 20th century, this text began to be misinterpreted. Sensationalists claimed the Maya predicted gigantic solar flares, the approach of an asteroid, or even linked the date to extraterrestrial civilizations. Hollywood seized on the idea, and in the 2000s, films and TV shows created the image of an ancient prophecy that supposedly predicted a catastrophe for all humanity. The closer winter 2012 approached, the stronger the panic grew. People prepared for the end of the world, some sold their property, and cults promised salvation to those who were ready to meet that day correctly. History knows many examples of humanity expecting imminent doom. In the year 1000, many in Europe were convinced the world was about to end. And in our time, fears of nuclear war, global warming, and environmental catastrophes have spawned many grim future scenarios. People love doomsday prophecies because they give a sense of significance to current events. We want to believe that we live in an exceptional time, that our century is the last. But if the Maya teach us anything, it is that there is no end. Time moves in a circle, epochs replace one another, and any conclusion is just the beginning of a new path. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Share your thoughts and ask questions in the comments.